Thanks for joining us today. My name is Stephanie. I am the executive assistant of the platform solutions team. Today, we are joined with my colleagues, Greg and Val. Before we dive into the content today, just two quick items to go over. The first one is we are recording this webinar. So should you want to review it later, or maybe you have some questions and you want to go back, this will be available on our website and on our socials. And secondly, we are going to be holding questions till the end of the webinar. So feel free to pop them in the box below and we'll go over them. Should we run into the event where we run out of time, we will reach out to you directly, or you are absolutely welcome to message us afterwards with any additional questions. So without any further ado, Greg, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Steph. I'm going to share my screen. Good afternoon, folks. I'm Greg Stanley, Director of Platform Solutions with Smart Simple. Delighted to have you all here again for the second running of this webinar. Today, we're going to be looking at the system security summaries and the system performance summaries. And these are two tools within the platform that give you an overview of any potential issues within your configuration. Now, I like to highlight that we're not saying that you necessarily have to address these items. That's not the case whatsoever, particularly in relation to security and performance. What we're essentially saying is that there are maybe better ways to address some of these items. So when we go through and we talk about the various different levels or highlight some key items, do keep that in mind. We're going to look at, I'm going to present the security summary to begin with, and then Val will take over and talk about the system performance summary. So to access these summaries, they're visible to global administrators, and you go into global settings, and they're available here in the system information tab within the system, the initial tab. So we have their system security summary and the system performance summary. We also have two others, or a number of others: the design summary, the feature summary, storage and system summary. We won't be going through those today, but they are very useful, so I would suggest that you go through them in your own time. When I open the security summary in my demo environment here, straight away, we'll see a nice big red fail issue error message there. And that's essentially flagging that we failed the summary. Okay, so it's telling us that we have too many high-level issues, too many medium-level issues that we need to address, or that we should address. Now, when I say should, the reason I say that is because for some long-standing clients in particular, there may have been methods of configuration used in the past that have been improved upon, right? So we no longer, for example, permission organization and user relationships through the security panels. We use the company and user security matrices. Now, it's best practice, of course, to use the user and company security matrices, but it requires some additional configuration. So if you're happy with how your system's security is currently set up, and you're aware that there is a high-level issue there or a high flag being raised, you can keep that in mind. You don't necessarily have to jump out of your way to address these things. We're simply making you aware that there are areas that you could improve your security posture if you do want to do that. So just to kind of talk about the high risk or high issue or high flagged items. These are things that you should realistically be addressing. So if you are in any way concerned, these are the things that you would be able to take control of to improve that security posture. There's a couple of key ones that we're going to highlight. We're not going to go through absolutely everything today, but there's a couple of key elements that I like to flag. So the first on, again, some of our legacy or long-serving clients, and this item may be flagged as a high security risk. And as I said, it's enabling the company and user security matrix. It may be organization and user security matrix on your side. Again, if and as long as the security is set up in a way that makes sense, it's something that you can leave flagged as a high level or a high risk issue. But if you do want to improve your posture, again, you get more granular settings here. And so the user and the company security matrix allows you to control how specific user roles interact with each other and how they interact with different organization categories as well. So it's far more granular than the traditional permissions that we have previously. There's a whole host of resources available on our YouTube channel where I go through all of the security summaries and security matrices in more detail. So feel free to check those out if you do want a little bit more information around those. The security summaries themselves include these nice, helpful links on the right-hand side of the screen to bring you directly to the settings that are flagged. Okay, so the majority of these in the base platform security are really dealing with either classic features or features that really shouldn't be left turned on for a long period of time. So, for example, two that we see from time to time would be the desktop API and the Pandora API. The desktop API is used for initial data import in some systems, so it's no longer required. If your system is live, you can turn that off straight away. The same is true for the Pandora API. It's a legacy construct within the platform that we used before we had the Smart Connect API. So again, you can turn those off. Other elements like turning on SSL, turning on SOAP web services and other items, very simple. You click on the link to the setting, you scroll to the particular toggle or the particular option, and you can simply turn that on. Then you can return to your security summary, and those high-level flags for those particular items will be removed. We do our best to include an explainer as well in the details tab as to how to improve or the reasoning for each of the individual options. Some of these will be expanded on over time as we get around to them. But some nice easy wins here, for example, would be the password and activation policy. There's a host of different options that are visible on this particular page, but in this case, we're not setting our passwords to expire at all. So again, best practice would be to have a time limit on those passwords, so users have to go in and reset them, every 6 months or every year. So again, in this case, simple click into that particular setting. You can see the 0 is there. You can change that to 365, and we now have the password set to expire once a year. And again, that high-level flag is no longer going to be visible. Now, another item related to the security matrix at the base level is this enable classic security behavior setting for the security matrix. This is an additional setting that was activated in the last upgrade within the summer, and it basically changes the behavior of the classic, or it gives you the option to change the behavior of the security matrix to be an AND condition. What that means is that previously it was a hierarchy, so in the organization hierarchy, or a category role permission. So if either of those settings were set to true for a given role, you had access to those records. It's now been set to be an AND condition, so that both sets of that condition needs to be true. So for example, if you have system admin role and category set to all, both of those conditions have to be true. Whereas previously, if you had category all or system admin all, you were able to see if either of those conditions were met. So again, it's just improving the security posture for the base platform. Now, if we're modifying any of these things, particularly around security matrices or sign-up pages or how users would interact with the system, of course, it's always best to test these on backup in advance or on a test environment if you have a third environment to play around with. Security matrices in particular, because they can expose data to others that shouldn't be able to see it, you can explicitly give access to all records using the security matrix. So you want to be very careful when you're making changes in those elements. A couple of other things that we like to highlight here, just from a low-hanging fruit perspective and just kind of best practices again. Smart folders permissions here. We have certain folders that are set to inherit from the parent. Now, what that means is that there's a potential risk to, again, expose the content within those folders, unnecessarily. So if we have a folder where we're exposing and we have permission set to view all or to a specific role or a specific organization, but for the child folders nested within there, we want to change the behavior. We don't want to expose it to all of those roles. Turning off that inherit from parent would relieve that. So it just means that there's an elevated risk of accidentally exposing files within those folders. There are perfectly legitimate use cases for these. Maybe we have a walkthroughs document, right, or an FAQs folder, and in there we have nested subfolders for videos or for PDF documents that you use for resources for your applicant users. Those are perfectly fine scenarios where you want to allow users to get through to the nested child files. However, HTML documentation that are in configurable folders, you probably don't want to do that. You don't want to give external access or everybody access to the HTML files or the configuration files that are in the platform or in the smart folders construct. Another simple thing that we can very easily address is leftover Smart Simple user accounts. So our implementation teams would use these during the initial build out of projects. But again, it's best practice to delete them because our implementation teams, after they leave and are no longer working on the project, they no longer need access to your system, right? So you can delete all of them apart from support@smartsimple.com. That's the only one that should be remaining because that's how we can assist you through our support desk. Everybody internally has access to the support desk, or not everybody, but appropriate parties have access to the support desk, and we can always recreate new user accounts for additional projects if needed. But like that, if they're no longer required, they can be removed. The same is true here for internet-enabled reports, and again, internet-enabled smart folders, just best practice and kind of warnings more so than anything else, that if you are creating these kind of internet-enabled reports, anybody with that hyperlink can access that data. So you have to be careful again that you're not exposing data that you shouldn't be through a hyperlink. But again, there are perfectly legitimate use cases to be using those elements, and the same is true, as I said, for internet-enabled smartphones, right? Now, shifting down to the UTA, each individual UTA is also flagged in the security summary, and they will have similar issues flagged in most cases. Some things that we should always keep an eye out for is that we have a level 1, level 2, and level 3 security matrix setting set up. Again, that defines how users of a specific role interact with the level 1, level 2, and level 3 records. So just to show you an idea of how these should or can be configured. Again, this is not exhaustive, and this is not every client situation will be different. But a typical example of how this would be set up would be to allow for an organization contact or an applicant user to be able to add all records, okay, because they need to initiate their new applications to begin with. So they have to be able to create them because there's no assignment at the point of creation. But after a record is created, they can only view or edit what they are explicitly assigned to, okay? So they cannot edit or view all. And we also then have permission in this particular environment for those users to view everything within their organization. So if I'm in, one of my grant-seeking organizations and we have a team, I can see everything that's going on within my organization. There's other scenarios where that would not be the case, and you may want to explicitly deny that. So again, be aware of those in your own business processes. Shifting up then to maybe the grant staff roles. In these particular cases, we have view, add, edit, and assignment access for every record, but we don't have the ability to delete. That is restricted in our scenario to the system administrator. And then finally, if you take a look at the reviewer role here, they have no ability to add new records. They can only view and edit records that they're explicitly assigned to. Again, in some scenarios, you may want to remove this because they don't need access to the level 1 application if they're primarily focused on the level 2s, but they will need level 2 assigned view access to the level 1 record in this particular case. So that's a very quick summary. Again, we have comprehensive YouTube walkthroughs of the security matrices, so do feel free to address those yourselves. A couple of other things that are worth enabling: reader logs for level 1s, 2, and 3s. Again, it just provides you with visibility from an audit perspective around individual users that are viewing or accessing specific records. And then again, we have high-level summaries, or again, highlighting optional or warnings again, because we have certain roles that have the ability to add all records. Right. So again, legitimate use cases for those are perfectly fine. But again, you do need to be aware of those. You wouldn't want to have an external role, for example, with view all, because it gives users access to absolutely everything. You should always be using the assignment or the owner levels of permissions in both of these cases. So that's my piece of the presentation complete. I'm going to pass it over to Val now, and she'll talk about the performance summary, and I'll keep an eye on the chat box for any questions in relation to this piece.
Thank you so much, Greg. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, perfect. So yeah, like Greg mentioned, my name is Val. I'm a Platform Solutions Manager, and I'm gonna be presenting the system performance summary that we have. Again, you can find these in your global settings, the first tab, system, and then right under security summary, you're going to see the performance summary. So very similar structure than the system security summary. We have our base platform here, and then we're gonna find all of our UTAs, right? They're gonna be broken down into the UTAs. We're gonna see high, medium, low, and any warnings that we have. In order to get a passing grade, we would need to resolve all the high severity items as well as the medium severity items. So in this case, because we don't have any medium, right, it's not showing us as a criteria that we would need to pass, right? But that would be the case. So again, just similar to Greg, I'm gonna highlight a couple of the most common items that we usually see in clients' platform. Again, the whole thing with these summaries is not that there's something bad or wrong with the configuration. We want to just reiterate that we are just showing some potential issues, right? Not that something is wrong. Because again, with the performance summary, the difference is that if you're experiencing any slowness or performance issues, there may be contributory factors that we highlight here in the performance summary. All of these flags are advisory, right? So if you're happy with the way your system is performing and you're not experiencing, any type of performance or lag when the page loads, etc., then obviously there will be no need to worry about this. But sometimes if we are, it's important to just go into our system performance summary and just check some of our different flags, right, or items. So I'm going to start with mentioning the first one that we see that it's very common. So this portal sections items that we have here, and like it's showing everything is going to appear in the details, right? So it's going to tell us exactly what the system is having an issue performing with. And here it's just telling us that we have too many list views and or aggregate shortcut portal sections, right? So what that means is if we have a aggregate shortcut in a portal, for example, I'm going to show the ones that we have here in home in our grants demo system. So in this case, we have 4, right? The system has to run that specific count every single time we load the page, right? So every time we're loading home, it has to do the count for those 4 separate shortcuts. In this case, that I know, for example, it's displaying my messages. What this is doing is that it's loading 3 or 4 different list views. So I believe messages in draft, send, archive, and maybe one more. So basically it's running those list views in the background, right? Every time we are reloading wherever we have that portal shortcut in, right? So what this is doing is just flagging this and telling us that it could potentially have a longer load time when it's showing that shortcut, right? So similar to the one here in home. Another one that I think it could be the most common item that we see in our system performance summary is when we have, so this one, we're getting it as a warning now, but it's a display text and variables, and it shows too many variable fields, right? So again, this is very common. What that means is that the statements in each field, right, have to load when the record is loaded. And then on top of that, if we add them to list views, it would result in like thousands of records, right? Trying to resolve that same query at the same time. So, what would be ideal and what we recommend as a best practice is to, instead of having a display text and variable field, just changing that type of field to a plain text field, and then populating that text field with that specific variable that you want to display into the default value field section, right? Again, just changing this display text and variables to a plain text field, and then we have a section that's called default value, and then inputting that variable there, right? This way, it would change every time we save the record rather than every time it's loading, right? So just to do not overload the system with display text and variables. Another one that we find that it's very common, it's this one that we have right here in our meeting manager. So again, a custom field. And then we see here, it's a visibility logic, right? So it's very similar than the one above. What we're telling the system is that when we add a visibility logic is that, just to display that one field, it has to resolve that specific statement that we have inputted every time we load a record, right? So in this case, we're seeing that we have 2 report properties, and then this owner ID check, right? For 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we were to have only one statement, like one report property, the system would probably flag it as low, as a low impact item. But the issue is that we have created kind of like a cumulative effect, right? By adding these other two statements here. So a different report property plus the list syntax owner ID, right? So that's why I would flag it as a high impact item, and it would cause a little bit of a load time issue. What we're telling the system basically with this statement right here is that in order for this condition to be true, right, it has to display it. So, in order for that one field to display, it has to first pass the name of the record, run a specific report, then export all the data from that report, compare every single line, the result for every single line for Smart Simple webinar test, then pass it back to the second report, run that report, export all the data from that to see if the value is true, to check again for Smart Simple webinar test. And then finally, on top of all of that, it has to go to the list view and see that the owner name, right, equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those are 3 different significant conditions just to display that one custom field, right? So, we believe that it's important to note that, especially when it comes to like visibility conditions, they're okay to use. We believe that in very limited circumstances, where the logic that it's being applied, it's very straightforward. One condition in a visibility report would be more than enough, and maybe we just have like the owner name, because we don't want to use report properties in that way, because it would just cause massive load times just to load that one field, right? And then again, if we want to modify this visibility logic, we can just go right to the settings, and it's going to take us to that specific field, and we can just go ahead and edit that. So easy way to edit. I want to show a specific use case of one that we had instead of a high, a severe, right, case. And again, we see here that they have a aggregator. It's again the cumulative effect that we talk about, right? So they have an aggregated function which they're doing a sum. So basically a sum of values in a field or a count or an aggregate of values in a field, which on its own, it's perfectly fine. But on top of that, they have a list syntax, which again, on its own, perfectly fine. But on top of that, we have a report property, right? So, what it's worrying about all of this is that it's in a formula, right? So every time, in this case, it was submission manager formula. So a level 1 record is saved, all of this has to run, right? So imagine if we were to be doing like a batch update, right? With records that have all of them have to run, it would definitely not be efficient at all, because it creates what we refer often to like a snowball effect, right? So I think it's important to just make sure that we are not overloading the system with statements after statement after statement, especially if it's just to load one field, etc. We also have use cases where, sometimes, we have a lot of tasks in one workflow, so that would also cause a little bit of a load time issue. So again, it's just to be mindful of, whenever we are configuring something new, to avoid that snowball effect if we don't want to, have a lot of time loading one specific page, right? So yeah, that's it for the system security performance summary, and the system security. I see that we have one question in our panel, right?
Hi, thanks, Val. Yeah, so it looks like one question came in, so I'll leave it up between you two who wants to answer this one. So the question that came in says, I have an update task high flag on base. What does that mean, and how can it be fixed?
Yeah, for sure. I'll take that, Stephanie. Thanks. So that particular item is just suggesting that in a single workflow, there are too many update custom field tasks, right? So it could probably more than 10 update custom field tasks in one single workflow. Now, the way to address that is by merging the updates that are required into a single task. So again, this is one of those newer pieces of functionality that's been rolled out over the last while. that allows you to update multiple custom fields at the same time in a single update task. So that's how you would address that, by shifting or by merging all of those update custom field tasks into one single task, if possible. You may have branching logic or other conditions that apply, in which case there's, again, may not be as big a concern, because if we're branching, we're not running all of the update tasks. All the performance summary is doing is performing a count of the total number of tasks that are in a given workflow. So do keep that in mind as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Greg. So we'll allow another minute or so just in case there's any other questions that come in. But again, as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, so you can rewatch this. It will be sent to you. It can be found on our website and on our socials. Any questions that are arising after the fact, feel free to send us an email and we'll get back to you. But it looks like we're going to wrap up there. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Val, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
folks.